So you and I have a couple things in common, and particularly, so your father and my father were both firefighters, and incidentally, then would have been brothers in the union of the IAFF, which is the International Association of Firefighters.
Yeah.
And your dad was quite a pioneer in a lot of things, and my understanding was there was something to do with a fire hydrant. What do you think is one of your biggest lessons that you can now sort of, now that you've lost your father, and you can say the biggest lesson that your dad sort of gave you or brought to your attention?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that story about the fire hydrant, because it's from that fire hydrant story that I learned, having the energy to do what is right and believing what is right and let nothing else get in your way.
Mm.
The fire hydrant story was, my father was from a town called Baldwin. I live now in Port Jefferson, but the town that I grew up with was Baldwin, Long Island, on the South Shore of Long Island. And back in the 1960s, when he was chief, they would go to a hydrant, and when they opened up the hydrant, junk would come out, and bags and sneakers and just clothes, and it would clog the hydrant. So my father went around when they went to a fire, and they put the hose on, and there was no water coming out, and they realized what it was. They put that fire out, and then my father said, "Listen, we're going to go around in Baldwin, and we're going to open the fire hydrants and flush them out. So when we get to a fire, none of that junk will be there."
Mm.
So as my father went there, and they would do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, because that's mostly when people were not taking showers in Baldwin, so it wouldn't affect the water supply. And they'd open it up and let each hydrant run for a little while, and you'd see all this junk come out. They'd clean the junk out of the street, throw it out for garbage, close the hydrant, and go to the next hydrant. And as it was happening, my father realized that as they did that, certain hydrants had a different amount of pressure. He had a pressure machine that he would hold in the force of the water, and it would tell him how much pressure. Well, if the hydrant was closer to the main, area of where the water was coming in, there was more pressure. If it was further down the loop, there was less pressure. So my father started to paint the hydrants different colors to know the pressure.
Mm.
White meant 20,000 pounds per square inch. Blue meant this, red and yellow. So now he knew when he got to a fire, that hydrant, he knew what the pressure was to know what truck to put in to get the most amount of water to put the freaking fire out.
Nice, nice.
As he was opening up these hydrants at 2 in the morning, the local authority and the water company noticed that there was an amazing amount of pressure that was being released at 2 in the morning, every 2 o'clock in the morning, in the town of Baldwin. So they sent somebody out that night. They saw what the fire department was doing, and they came up to my father and said, "Who's the chief?" My father was, "What you're doing is illegal." And my father, he says, if it's illegal, then you guys should be doing it, because this is stopping us from saving lives. So you should be coming out, or put a better drainage system, a screening system, to not let this junk get into the waterway. Well, the guy said, "Well, that's not our responsibility." So my father said, "Well, my responsibility is to save lives. So we're going to keep doing this to 2 o'clock in the morning." Eventually, this turned into a lawsuit. So now the water authority of Nassau County, where this was, takes my father and the Boulder Fire Department to court. All the lawyers were there. They go into court now, and they wanted him to stop doing this. So they first go up and they present their case. This is against Dominic Famularo, chief of the Boulder Fire Department, to stop them from wasting water that people are paying for, blah, 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 blah. So they go on this. So they present their case. So at one point, the judge says, "Mr. Famularo," actually he said, "Chief Famularo, is this true in what they're saying?" And my father stood up and said, "Absolutely. We drain the water at 2 o'clock every morning." So the judge said, "Please explain why you do this." So when my father explained it to him, the judge said, "You mean all this junk gets into the hoses?" And my father said, "Yeah, when it gets into the hoses, you can't really get into the hose to clean it out. You got to cut the hose. That makes the hose shorter, and then replug it." He said, "So we're losing valuable hose. We're slowing down." And my father said, "Your Honor, if I get to a fire and a hose is plugged up and I can't save lives, if you side with them, that death is on your shoulders."
Yeah.
And that's what my father says to the judge. The judge sits back, said nothing for a few minutes, took his gavel, hit the gavel, and said to the water authority, "You will drain the hydrants under the direction of Chief Famularo, at whenever he wants it done, and you will find a better draining system to protect us so junk doesn't get in there, effective immediately. And he hits the gavel and says, and if I see the water company in here again about this challenge, I'm throwing you all in jail. Now get the hell out of my court.
That's nice.
So my father's
Love that.
perseverance, his belief, his commitment,
Yeah.
his reason to want to save life. This is a volunteer fire department. These guys weren't getting paid.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Volunteer. So
Yeah.
that was just one of many stories. So that story to me, was really kind of how we grew up with that. My father's belief in doing what was right was more valuable than what was damaging to maybe himself personally.